Hello and welcome to RachAquarelle. This is a time-lapse version of my tutorial on painting these two cardinals. The full tutorial is also here on my YouTube channel. And these are the colors that I actually used for this painting. So you can see it's a very limited palette, which I really love using a very limited palette. When I did my full tutorial and was getting started, I thought I might need to use a lot more colors than this, but these are the colors that I actually used. DS stands for Daniel Smith, W and N stands for Winsor & Newton. Those are just the brands that I happen to use. That doesn't mean that you have to use those. There's lots and lots of great watercolor brands out there. So this was just my little sketch that I did creating the template, which is available to you for free in the link below in this video, as well as the link that is in the description of the full tutorial. You can go to my Gumroad page and download that, print it, and use it to transfer onto your own watercolor paper. So I'm going to start out working on the female bird, and because she of course is going to have a more earthy, toned down, neutral look overall, that's how I'm going to start the base layer of her body. So I am using kind of a different balance between using yellow, which is my warm yellow, my cool red, and then just a little bit of blue to tone down those colors. And here to start adding a little bit of definition, I've added more of my cool blue into that same mix. So it's kind of a muted violet. And she is still quite wet while I'm working on her here. So all of this paint that I lay down is going to have really nice soft edges. And now I'm just beginning to build up a little bit more definition. I'm just kind of shifting that neutral color between having more blue or more red or more yellow in order to get the effects that I need. For a lot of the shadow areas, the neutral color that I use has a little bit more of the cool red and cool blue and just a little bit of that warm yellow. And that's kind of my go-to color for any shadowed area or any area where I'm trying to add a little bit more definition. And I really like doing that where for the entire painting, I'll kind of have one go-to color that I mix to create all the shadows, because I feel like that really helps give a sense of cohesion and harmony overall to the painting. For the male cardinal, I'm starting out with just an overall wash of this kind of orange color. So this is really just my warm yellow and my cool red, because I felt like the undertones on the photo reference I was using were very warm. And because the cool red tends to be very much a transparent color, it's easier to use that as a glaze rather than using my warm red, because the warm reds tend to be a little bit more opaque and not as well suited to do glazing. And really the male cardinal I found a lot simpler and more straightforward to work on because there isn't as much nuance in his coloration. It's really just a matter of balancing between yellows, oranges, and then really bright reds. So here you can see I mixed up a little bit more of that muted violet color to begin adding a little bit of definition to him. And even though much of his coloration around his eyes is actually black, I like to start out much lighter than that and then build my darker values on top of it, because I think that that really gives a sense of dimension to things like fur or feathers. Because if you think about animals with fur or feathers, those things are kind of layered on top of each other. And if we just go in and paint with our darkest values that we see in the animal's coloration, we get an effect that feels a little bit flattened. So in order to give a little bit of dimensionality, I really like to build up to the darkest features. And I allow some of those lighter brush strokes that I apply to show through even the darkest strokes. And much of this painting, other than that very first layer that I used for each bird, is going to be dry brushing. And I do have a video tutorial that goes in depth on dry brushing. It's something that I use a lot when I do more realistic paintings, or if I just want to have a lot of texture in one of my illustrations. So now I'm really looking back at the female bird and kind of noticing the different shifts in color temperature on her. And I noticed that the back of her wing is a little bit cooler. So what I did is I kind of just glazed on top of that neutral warm color with a little bit of ultramarine blue, and that really cooled it down and differentiated that wing from the rest of her body, which is a much warmer neutral color. And now here on the male bird, I'm just adding some dry brush strokes and some definition where needed. And now I'm finally working on this branch, which I don't spend much time on because it's not a focal point here, but I'm starting out with just that muted violet, glazing over it with my warm yellow, going in with darker muted violet to add more texture and definition to the branch. And now I'm using just ultramarine blue to dry brush in the eyes because there's a little bit of reflection in the eyes, and many people interpret reflection in eyes as being white, but if you think about it, eyes of animals are typically going to be reflecting their environment around them. So if they're outside, then they might be reflecting the blue sky. So that's why I went in there with kind of a light wash of ultramarine blue, my cool blue. And then I'll use my neutral color, the Hematite Genuine, to actually fill in the dark parts of the eyes, leaving just a little glint of that blue showing through. And now I'm using the Hematite Genuine mixed with my cool blue, and just using that to dry brush in even a little bit more definition where needed. And the important thing too, when you're doing an animal like a bird, for example, and you're using a photo reference, you don't want to get too tied into staring and examining the photo reference, because I think what happens for a lot of people is they see a lot of detail in there where there isn't actually a lot of contrast, and then in their painting they actually end up over articulating those areas and adding contrast where it really doesn't need to be. And I think that the best way to handle that is just to ignore areas that don't have a lot of contrast. Let those be really subtle and muted, and you'll get a more natural look. You don't have to paint every single thing that you see. All right, so we're just finishing this up. I've tilted up the painting just so I can see it a little bit better and make sure that things are right. And now I'm just adding a few splashes of really bright red to both birds where needed. And that is basically it. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll check out the full tutorial as well. And as always, I hope that you have a great day.